Hi there! You're about to listen to a vintage episode of the Under the Microscope podcast. While the content is still as relevant and as interesting as when it was recorded, our webpage has changed. You can now find us at thesciencetalk.com/real-scientist-nano. Welcome to Under the Microscope. This series is brought to you by the Real Scientists Nano team. Our goal is to provide a platform where scientists can communicate their work and interact with the public. With that in mind, every week we introduce you to a scientist working in the field of materials and nanoscience, who would be curating the RealSci_Nano Twitter account. Hi everyone. Today we have with us Giulia Pacchioni, who is a senior editor at Nature Review Materials. Hi Giulia, how are you?
Hello, I'm very good, thank you.
Excellent. So let's start to get to know you even more. Could you tell us about your career so far?
Sure. I grew up in Milan, in Italy, and that's where I studied for my undergrads, both my bachelor and master's degrees. I studied physics at the University of Milan. And after that, I decided to go for a PhD at the École Fédérale Polytechnique in Lausanne, in Switzerland, where I studied experimental physics, and I was doing scanning tunneling microscopy, studying the way small molecules behave and interact on surfaces. So these little molecules can self-assemble on the surface under certain conditions. And then I studied how you can deposit atoms that are magnetic. And so they have interesting properties and they self-assemble. You can make clusters. So that was quite a lot of fun. And around the end of my PhD, I started thinking about what I wanted to do with my career. And I realized that an editorial career was a very interesting option for me because I like writing and talking about science. I like thinking about the breadth of different topics rather than just focusing on a single thing. And I also liked science. So maybe I didn't want to stay in science as an active scientist, but I wanted to stay close to science. And when I was thinking these thoughts and wondering what I could do, I saw an ad for a position in a new journal that they were preparing to launch in London, and that was Nature Reviews Materials, which sounded just fantastic because in a reviews journal, the editor have a very creative role where they think about topics and authors and they have real input to put into articles. So that looked like the dream job for me. And I was very lucky to get the position. I thought I was a bit junior because I was coming right out of my PhD and a lot of editors have postdoctoral experience, but I think I was the right profile at the right time. So that's how I started my editorial career. And after a couple of years, Nature decided to launch a new title in the Nature Reviews Physical Sciences, which was Nature Reviews Physics. And there I got the opportunity to work as a locum chief editor, which means to cover a maternity leave for the chief editor who had a baby when the journal was launching. So I had the opportunity to shape the journal and work with the team, which was a lot of fun because a new journal is a clean page and you need to decide what you want to do with it, what topics you want to cover, and there is a lot of freedom. So that was super interesting because I was working on the journal really from day one. And I worked there for 1 year. After the real chief editor came back, I stayed for another 6 months as a senior editor. And finally, most recently, I worked for 3 months with Nature Materials, again, as a parental cover because someone was on paternity leave. And there I got the opportunity to work with primary manuscripts, that is with manuscripts with new results rather than review content, which was new for me. And now I'm happily back at Nature Reviews Materials.
Back to where it all started, Nature
Yes.
Review Materials.
First
After
love.
jumping around, traveling around the journals, doing journal hopping, and collecting all different kinds of experiences and skill sets. That is really, really cool and very, very inspiring as well. And I didn't know that this much flexibility was possible. I thought once you get hired for a journal, then that's the journal that you stay with forever. But it's really good to know
that there is also this possibility to collect and have experience with different journals, because as you mentioned, review journals are different from the primary journals. So that's really, really cool. So Julia, where does your work fit in this big picture of materials and nanoscience? I mean, because you're not not an active researcher, not an active scientist.
Yeah, in general, I would say journals have a very important role in shaping the conversation in science, because especially journals that have a lot of visibility, like nature journals, what we publish, people talk about, and people read these journals to find ideas and maybe think about potential collaborations and new directions. So the decisions we make about what content to publish and what content to promote is a reflection of what the community is interested in, but we can also sometimes decide to highlight specific topics because we think they are emerging and we want to give them more visibility. We want to make people aware of them. So the scope of my journal is very broad because it's whole of material science. Of course, a lot of that is nanoparticles and nanomaterials. So I would think regarding your question, the journal is all over the place in this space. And we're also really trying to catalyze conversations about topics that are important for this community, and maybe they're not strictly scientific topics. For example, mentoring, how to find mentors, how to mentor students, careers. Is academia the only career option? What should people consider when thinking about their future? And if they do want a career in academia, how should they think about it? And race and diversity, and how can we have more women and more people of color in the community? What how can we support minorities, or all these topics that are very important. That's also featured quite prominently in the journal. So in a way, we want to be both a platform for scientific discussion and also a place where people can come to share their ideas about how we can make this community and this slice of academia a more welcoming place for everybody.
Okay. Wow, that's really cool. I wasn't aware that it's more than just the science. It's more than just the scientific conversations, because diversity, inclusion, mentoring, all these things, visibility for minorities, providing a platform to minorities, that is something which is extremely important in the long term, also for the science as well. So that's really, really cool. And I hope you can talk more about that when you're taking over the account, because
Gladly.
that is because all these topics I'm also passionate about. They're very close to my heart as well. Um, so my next question is I'm sure the projects that you work on are um, different than the typical scientific experiment, so to say. And I'm sure you have worked on several projects. You already mentioned like launching a new journal and stuff like that. Um, so among all the different kinds of projects that you have worked on so far, if you have to pick one that you're most proud of, or the most fun or quirky one, could you pick one and explain it to us in super simple words, please?
Thank you for this interesting question. As you say, in a journal, there are a lot of interesting projects we undertake, but okay, thinking about what was exciting last year, I would pick a special article we published. It's called a viewpoint article. Basically, it's an article where different people answer a same question. And in this case, I think you discussed in the podcast moire materials in the past. Very simply, these are, you take different layers of 2D materials. For example, you take 2 layers of graphene and you put them on top of one another with a small angle, and this creates what is called a moire pattern, which is basically a modulation of the electron density. Or you can do this with many different materials, even with materials that don't have an angle but have different lattice spacing. For example, graphene and boron nitride. You put them on top of one another, you get this moire pattern, which is very interesting because it generates a lot of physical phenomena that people are investigating very keenly at the moment. There is superconductivity that looks very exciting because maybe it's similar to superconductivity in high temperature superconductors. There is a whole world of physics inside, and it's all very new and the community is very excited about it. So I decided to have this viewpoint article where I asked 10 experts, where do they think the field is going, or what are the most promising direction, which was a very fun project, because normally in reviews you always look back at what has happened recently and what has been discovered. And this time it was about looking forward, about what people hope will be discovered or what they think is interesting. And different people have very different answers, because they might be working on different aspects of the problem, which is very well defined. But of course, someone is interested in optical properties and someone is interested in electronic properties, and their vision for the future is different. And it was a great project, because almost everybody I invited said yes, and they came together to write this piece, and there was a lot of discussion going on. And also, we're going to bring this discussion forward, hopefully in real life, because we're organizing a symposium with the same people and more experts in the field at the Materials Research Society spring meeting next year. So there's also, it was a great project that led to another great project.
That is really, really cool. This is a very, very cool idea. I'm definitely curious to read. Is that article published?
It is.
Okay, I hope you talk about that article as well when you're taking over the Twitter account. And just out of curiosity, I mean, this is a really cool project, and I can imagine why you picked this as the most recent one, let's say, that you're most proud of. Let's put it that way. Did you also have controversial opinions in these 10 people that you handpicked, that is like polar opposite views on the same material or the same topic? Did you have that kind of discussion as well?
No, actually, no, that didn't come up. And maybe it's because it was still a lot of new things being discovered. So people were not yet at the point where they were discussing too much about, no, what I say is more right than what you say. But it was more about, oh, I have an excellent discovery to present. And no, luckily, we were slightly worried about it, because you never know. And the article is published with everybody's names on it. So you need to make sure everybody's happy.
Exactly, because that can happen very easily. I mean, that happens at scientific conferences all the time in the Q&A section specifically, that, no, this is what I think. No, I know I'm right, and stuff like that. Maybe it happens in a nice way, in a constructive way at the spring meeting.
It might. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that would be really cool, just to add some spice to the discussion in a good way, not like starting fights and stuff, but just to stimulate more constructive discussions. That would be really nice. That sounds really, really cool. Awesome. So, Giulia, what do you like about your job? What aspects of your job do you like? Could you take us on that journey a little bit? What do you like about being a senior editor?
Maybe the part I like the most is the interaction with researchers, because I think I work quite closely with my authors to develop the article, and this really gives me a bit of insight about them as people. And I really like reminding myself that we see all this great science, but behind every great paper, there is a group of people who's working together, and they have their own dynamics, and different PIs handle their group in different ways. And some people are very happy in the group, some people may be less happy, somewhere there's a lot of stress or a lot of excitement. And I really like getting that sneak peek at how things feel a little bit behind the scene. And I really enjoy the feeling of being able to help authors really come across with their ideas, because obviously they have a lot of experience on the topic they're discussing, and they often have a lot of experience publishing. But I have quite a bit of experience about what reviewers will comment on. There are things that are they might seem minor, but I see them. I already know the referee is gonna be fixated on this. For example, if figures are called out of order, which is something that we can easily fix when I edit the text. But once the reviewer starts feeling the paper is not completely up to scratch because something is not perfect, some of them, they just become, let's say, less positively minded, or
less constructive.
less constructive. just ways to structure the discussion in a way that is easier for readers to follow, having more headers, having some sentences that just tell the reader what's going to happen in the next section. It is little things that if someone is writing a 25 pages article, they might want to keep in mind. And when this works well and there's this collaboration where the authors feel I could really make a contribution to the shape the article takes, then it's very satisfying.
Okay, I can imagine.
Oh, wait. I also
Yes.
wanted to mention I love going to conferences.
Oh, yes. Oh, please bring back the in-person conferences, please, and find a way to make them more eco-friendly, if that is possible. Oh, yes, conferences. What are those? Huh. That sounds really cool. I almost want to switch to being an editor now. I definitely want to explore that branch of my career as well. That sounds really, really interesting. Everything that you're mentioning, I think I am the kind of person who would also love whatever you're saying. So that sounds interesting. Awesome. So Julia, you do work with a lot of researchers, or you do work with a lot of scientists on a daily basis. So, what advice would you give scientists who are starting out today? Or if you were to go back in time and starting out today, you were starting out today, what advice would you give yourself?
Yeah, I will maybe focus on what advice I would give to scientists who are thinking about becoming editors. My general advice to scientists is I would say that sometimes in academia, you have the impression that becoming a professor is the only thing you should want. And this is not true for everybody. And this is fine, even if people around you seem to think that if you're going to find a job in a company, you're losing out. And when they say, oh, but this person, they're so bright and they're so clever and it's such a loss. Like, it's not a loss. They're going to be bright and clever in a company where they can make a difference and they can make great things. It's not, this idea that everything outside academia is not worth your time. That's absolutely not true. Which brings me to editorial careers are a great option if you're looking for stability and an interesting job that doesn't come with all the stress that's involved in an academic career. Then I would say the important thing is to cultivate your curiosity towards science, because what an editor needs is wanting to know about a lot of different topics in science. And when we interview for new editors, what we want to see is people who can see below their horizon of their own specific work. And a question we often ask is, can you mention some recent discoveries that you thought were very interesting in, for example, material science or physics? And a lot of candidates, they struggle with this question because it's hard for them to think about recent discoveries that are not directly related to their research. And obviously there is so much amazing science going on, and some of it is so important about sustainability and energy materials. And there, 2D materials, it's
a lot, yeah.
It's limitless, the amount of interesting things. And just being aware of what's going on is important. And I would suggest talking to your friends and asking them what they're working on, why is it important, why is it interesting, why they're passionate about it. And you might learn very interesting things that might help you in your research or whatever your next steps are. And in general, getting involved with opportunities. If there is the opportunity to organize a conference, or I had the opportunity to organize a summer school during my PhD because the university was looking for students who would like to organize their own school, or maybe the monthly seminars in your department. If there's something you can volunteer for, that will just enlarge your network and push you to look into topics that maybe you're not thinking about, but other people are interested in. Broaden your horizons. And also what you want as a young scientist is to have something in your CV that other people don't have. And of course, certain things that everybody wants, like the shiny science paper, you might not be able to engineer it at will, but other things are within your reach. Maybe there is a great blog that you want to collaborate with, or maybe you have your own science blog with your friends. Just little things that push you a little bit outside the normal comfort zone of your research.
So just more than science, more than the research itself, whatever skills you can pick up along the ways, pick up on those opportunities and take those opportunities and dabble and check what you like, what you don't like. That's very, very, very nice pieces of advice that you have given us, Julia. This is really, really nice.
Yeah, also
Uh,
because I feel often the university is a very friendly environment where to experiment. And there are a lot of people who can mentor you when you're trying out these activities. And it's easier to do that than maybe later in a company, or maybe you're not working in a company, or you're trying to work as a freelancer, and then using that network when you have it can be very beneficial.
Absolutely, you're absolutely right. So, Julia, I hope your work experience has been wonderful so far, and it will continue to be wonderful in the future as well. If you had three wishes to improve your work experience, what would you ask for? And I'm not promising anything here, okay?
All right. I would say one thing that would make my job easier is that I never know how many articles I will have to handle in a month or in a week, because people always promise, when you ask when you're going to submit your article, they always say in 4 weeks time. That is the standard answer, whatever the real timeline is. And I don't think authors are lying, it's just it's
Too
hard for them.
optimistic.
Yeah, it's hard for them to be realistic about how many other things they have to do. And sometimes the article comes 3 years later, but I never know if it's coming next year or tomorrow, which makes it really difficult to plan for content, because I can only publish 48 articles per year. So if they submit 55, then when is the exceeding amount gonna go? So that would be super nice. I think it will never happen, but it would be a nice thing. A more realistic wish is for authors to pay a little bit more attention to the formatting guidelines, because we have a limit for the number of words and a limit for the number of figures, and it's just easier for everyone if the article comes in and it's roughly in that ballpark, because sometimes it's twice as long, and then it just requires a lot of work and a lot of revisions to cut it down to the desired shape. Also, I still have a third wish.
Yes, you do.
And I would spend that to have an unlimited conference budget where I can just go wherever there are good topics and interesting scientists to hear all what's new and exciting.
Okay. Well, I would say all three of your wishes are very realistic. I
Thank
hope.
you.
I hope. I wish I could just be like, yes, Julia, tomorrow when you wake up, all your authors are gonna give you realistic deadlines, and all your authors, the submissions that you're gonna get are gonna be in the ballpark of the word limit and the figures limit, and you have unlimited well, in right now, you must have unlimited conference budget because there aren't many
In practice,
conferences that are.
exactly.
Technically, you have unlimited budget. If you can use it, that's a different story altogether. But no, on a serious note, I hope after you take over the account, after you talk about all these things, the word limit, how to structure the article, how to do the figures, how to make nice figures and stuff like that, I hope that will educate more and more researchers, more and more scientists, and you will get a more hygienic amount of submissions, hygienic kind of submissions. That would be really nice. I would like to hope that we are at least working towards it. Also, the unlimited conference budget. At this point, I would even settle for conferences taking place. I mean, just let
Okay,
them
you're
happen
right.
first. Yeah.
A
It's
step at a time.
exactly. Let's take it one step at a time. It has been wonderful speaking with you. But before I let you go, I have one last question for you. And I cannot record a podcast in 2021 without addressing the giant elephant in all the rooms, which is the pandemic, which started in 2020. So, what are your learnings from the year 2020 or the current pandemic that we still seem to be living in?
Yeah, for me, the most important is probably, I think a lot of people have reassessed a bit their priorities. And for a lot of us, it became very apparent that there are things that are just much more important than others, such as friends and family, and being there for them. Because we used to live in a world where we were always thinking, oh, but there is this project at work, there is this deadline, and I cannot take a break now, it's not the right time. And it's now clear to all of us that if there is a time that works to travel back home and see our families, then we should use that opportunity. And other things will wait, but there are just people that are too important to be put after all these needs, because there's always something else that will need to be done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And another thing is that now more than ever, it's we're all learning to be very mindful about what's going on in other people's life, because our days are full and we send a lot of emails and we make a lot of calls and there are deadlines and we need people to do things, and it's easy to become a bit impatient. But it's very important to remember that we don't know if someone is late because they forgot about the deadline, or because something happened and maybe their kids are homesick, maybe they needed to travel back home because someone in their family is sick. And having that extra understanding is never going to hurt, because the worst thing that can happen is that someone that was ignoring your emails is still ignoring your emails. But for someone who is struggling, it really makes a difference, I feel, if they feel that you're not pushing or you're not upset, you're just inquiring about something, and you do understand that that something might not happen immediately, and it's just a more open and friendly conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say, as a final point, during this time we have discovered that virtual conference can work quite well, and I've been at some where there was a lot of exchange of ideas that was quite interesting. But I am feeling quite keenly that the lack of in-person interaction is becoming a problem, because normally when I'm thinking about new topics to commission about, what do? I go to a conference, I go to the poster session, I see what the students are talking about, what projects everybody wants to take on, what are the newest results, what are the plans of the different labs. And that gives me a very good feeling for what's important, what's new, what's happening. And now it's very isolated, and at conferences people are not as willing to share unpublished results, because of course it's recorded on YouTube for everyone to see, and I can see what's been published, but what's been published has been done last year. And I think the same thing is true for everyone. Postdocs who are looking for new positions, it's not as easy for them to meet PIs who want new students. Where do they find them? It's not. And it's all collaborations, ideas, exchanges of opinions. It's great. All the virtual world has enabled us to come together as a community and to involve people who do not have an unlimited travel budget, because of course nobody can be at all conferences all the time, and for some people it's just not as easy to travel. Maybe they have small kids at home. But having a little bit, 1 or 2 events per year where we can really exchange ideas, or maybe local events, it will feel great.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, you're absolutely right. All 3 points that you mentioned, that's really, really important. Just understand that there's a human on the other side when you're sending those emails or reminders, that they might be going through a tough time, or they are just super full, or they just forgot about it. And also the other points that you mentioned with the conferences. And thank you very much for sharing your learnings. This is really, really interesting. Every time I ask this question to our guests, it's like, oh yeah, you're right. That is also true. So that adds to my learnings list as well. So thank you very much for that. This has been lovely, Giulia. Really enjoyed speaking with you, and really, really excited to see you on Real Scientist Nano. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening. To know more about us, please visit our website realscientistsnano.org and follow us on Twitter at realsci_nano.